Presentation slides. The Arab oil embargo and ethanol 50 years later. Slide 1. Title slide. Slide, ton- Slide content. The Arab oil embargo and ethanol 50 years later. Energy security, economic power, and geopolitics. Government transformation, global economic transformation after 1973. The Arab oil embargo of 1973 represents one of the most significant turning points in modern economic history. It demonstrates that energy is not merely a commodity but a strategic asset capable of reshaping global political and economic systems. While oil producing nations imposed export restrictions in response to geopolitical conflicts, industrial economies experienced several severe inflationary outcomes, supply shortages, and economic instability. The crisis exposed the structural vulnerability of countries dependent on imported hydrocarbons and forced policymakers to reconsider long term energy strategies. Over the past 50 years, one of the key developments has been the emergence of alternative fuels such as ethanol, which contribute to diversification of energy supply and reduction of geopolitical risks. Slide 2. Background of the 1973 oil crisis. Slide content. Triggered during the Yom Kippur War, OPEC restricted oil exports, oil prices increased rapidly, global energy shock. The 1973 oil crisis originated from geopolitical tensions in the Middle East during the Yom Kippur War. Oil producing countries, particularly members of OPEC, imposed an embargo on nations perceived to be supporting Israel. The restriction of oil supply created a sudden imbalance between supply and demand, causing oil prices to increase dramatically within a short period of time. This supply shock affected transportation systems, manufacturing sectors, and electricity production worldwide. Because oil was deeply embedded in industrial production processes, the price increase generated widespread economic instability across developed economies. Slide 3. Immediate economic effects. Slide content. Oil prices quadrupled, inflation increased sharply, production costs increased, fuel shortages occurred. The immediate consequence of the oil embargo was a sharp increase in global oil prices. The cost of crude oil rose approximately 4 times within a few weeks, dramatically increasing the cost of transportation and industrial production. Consumers experienced long lines at fuel stations and, in some cases, rationing systems were implemented. Businesses faced higher operational costs, which were passed on to consumers through higher prices. The combined effect of rising inflation and declining economic growth produced stagflation, a rare economic condition characterized by stagnant growth and rising prices. Slide 4. Concept of energy dependence. Slide content. High dependence on imported oil, limited domestic alternatives, supply is concentrated in a few regions, strategic vulnerability exposed. Prior to the oil embargo, many industrial economies relied heavily on imported oil from a small number of exporting countries. This concentration of supply created a structural vulnerability because disruptions in one region could significantly affect global energy availability. Dependence on external suppliers reduces Dependence on external suppliers reduces national control over economic conditions and exposes countries to geopolitical risks. The crisis revealed that energy dependence can create leverage for supplier nations, enabling them to influence political decisions of importing countries. Slide 5. Stagflation and macroeconomic instability. Slide content. Inflation increases across sectors, economic growth slowed, unemployment increased, monetary policy challenges emerged. The oil shock created macroeconomic instability across industrial economies. Increased energy costs raised the cost of producing goods and services, contributing to inflation. At the same time, reduced consumer spending and increased production costs caused economic growth to slow. Traditional policy tools such as interest rate adjustments were less effective because inflation was driven by supply constraints rather than excessive demand. Policymakers faced significant challenges in stabilizing the economy, and the 1970s became a decade characterized by persistent inflation and reduced productivity growth. Slide 6. Policy response after the crisis. Slide content. Government introduced energy policies, incentives for alternative fuels, investment in domestic energy production. Goal reduces dependency, pardon, goal reduce dependence on imports. Following the oil embargo, governments followed and introduced policy measures aimed at increasing energy security. These policies include tax incentives, research funding, and regulatory frameworks designed to encourage the development of alternative energy sources. One of the major objectives was to reduce dependence on imported oil by expanding domestic energy production capacity. The government also invested in strategic petroleum reserves to provide short term protection against supply disruptions. Slide 7. Emergence of ethanol industry. Slide content. Ethanol development as an alternative fuel. Correction. Ethanol developed as a fuel alternative. Renewable fuel policies introduced. Ethanol blended with gasoline. Production expanded over decades. Ethanol emerged as an alternative fuel capable of partially substituting petroleum-based gasoline. Policy supported Policy support played an important role in encouraging ethanol production through incentives and regulatory mandates. Ethanol can be blended with gasoline, allowing it to be integrated into existing fuel distribution systems without major infrastructure changes. Over several decades, production capacity expanded significantly, contributing to increased diversification of energy supply. Slide 8. Growth of renewable fuel and contribution. Slide content. Ethanol now part of fuel mix. Increased domestic production, reduced reliance on imported oil, diversified energy system. Over time, renewable fuels became an increasingly important component of national energy systems. Ethanol production expanded gradually as a technological improvement increased efficiency and reduced production costs. The integration of ethanol into gasoline supply contributed to increased resilience within energy markets by reducing dependence on imported oil. A diversified energy portfolio reduces exposure to supply disruptions and price volatility. Slide 9. Slide 9. Economic benefits of ethanol. Slide content. Lower fuel price volatility, reduced import expenditure, increased domestic economic activity, improved energy resilience. The use of ethanol contributes to economic stability by increasing fuel supply elasticity. Increased supply reduces upward pressure on fuel prices during periods of high demand or geopolitical disruption. Domestic production of ethanol reduces the need to import petroleum products, thereby retaining capital within the national economy. These effects contribute to improved macroeconomic resilience and reduce vulnerability to external shocks. Slide 10. Continued dependence on global oil markets. Slide content. Oil still globally traded commodity. Prices influenced by geopolitics. Supply shocks affect global economy. Energy independence incomplete. Despite significant progress in developing alternative fuels, Despite significant progress in developing alternative fuels, global oil markets remain interconnected. Oil prices are determined by global oil supply and demand conditions, meaning geopolitical disruptions can influence domestic fuel prices. Conflicts in major oil producing regions can lead to price increases even when domestic production capacity is high. Complete energy independence remains difficult due to the integrated structure of global commodity markets. Slide 11. Strategic petroleum reserves. Slide content. Emergency oil stockpiles used during supply disruptions, short-term stabilization tool, not permanent solution. Strategic petroleum reserves serve as a buffer against sudden supply disruptions. Governments store crude oil that can be released into markets during periods of shortage. These reserves help stabilize prices temporarily but do not eliminate long-term dependence on global energy markets. Long-term energy security requires diversification of supply sources and technological innovation as well. Slide 12. Long-term energy transition. Slide content. Shift toward diversified energy sources, renewable fuels increasing, technology improving efficiency, energy systems evolving gradually. Script 1. Energy transitions occur over extended periods because infrastructure investments require large amounts of capital and time. Renewable fuels such as ethanol represents intermediate steps toward more diversified energy systems. Technological innovation continues to improve efficiency and reduce costs of alternative energy sources. Over time, diversified energy portfolios contribute to increased stability and reduce vulnerability to geopolitical disruptions. Slide number 13. Geopolitical implications. Slide content. Energy influences the global power structure. Resource control affects diplomacy. Diversification reduces vulnerability. Energy security is linked to national security. Control over energy resources influences international power dynamics. Countries possesses countries possessing large energy reserves can exert influence through supply decisions. Conversely, countries dependent on imports must consider geopolitical risks in their economic planning. Diversification of energy sources reduces vulnerability and increases strategic autonomy. Energy policy therefore plays an important role in national security strategy. Slide 14. Conclusion. Start content. 1973 crisis reshaped energy policy. Ethanol continued to diversification. Ethanol contributed to diversification. Dependence reduced but not eliminated. Energy transition continues. The Arab oil embargo demonstrated the strategic importance of energy supply chains. The crisis exposed structural weakness in economies dependent on imported oil and motivated policy changes aimed at increasing resilience. The development of ethanol contributed to diversification of energy sources and reduced vulnerability to geopolitical shocks. However, global energy markets remain interconnected, meaning external events continue to influence domestic economic outcomes. The transition towards diversified energy system is an ongoing process shaped by technological innovation, policy decision making, and geopolitical developments altogether.